Nora Callahan grew up in a family that never truly saw her. Forgotten, silenced, and erased, she quietly faded into the background until one moment changed everything. In this deeply emotional 7-part family drama, we follow Nora's journey from invisibility to identity, from heartbreak to healing. Discover how she reclaimed her voice, her name, and her story, inspired by true experiences of adoption, erasure, and personal triumph. If you've ever felt unseen, this story is for you. Subscribe for more real stories that heal. Voiceover friendly, mature, and powerfully told. No one turned around to notice me. As the priest spoke, I traced the outline of a name etched into the pew. N+M 2001. That was the year we built the lake dock together, Michael and I. We were 14 and 12. We laughed and splashed water and swore to always be there for each other. Then came the speech. My mother stood and took the microphone. Her voice, practiced and public, echoed through the pews. Michael has always been our guiding light. From the moment we held him, we knew our lives had changed. It has been the greatest honor, raising our one true son into the man he is today. Our one true son. The words punched through me like a cold wind. No mention of the girl they adopted when she was 6. No trace of the child who stayed up nursing Margaret through surgeries, who took on 2 jobs in high school to help pay off Thomas's debts, who missed her own graduation because Michael's soccer championship was on the same day. I folded my hands tightly. My palms burned. After the ceremony, people spilled into the cobblestone courtyard. Laughter rose, mingled with champagne bubbles and old hymns. I stood by the edge of the stairs. Michael walked out, hand in hand with his bride, Lauren. His eyes met mine, just for a second. Then he turned away. I left before the reception, not because I was hurt, not because I was shocked, but because I realized with strange clarity that I had never really been part of the story they told about themselves. I walked to the edge of Karen Lake. The water shimmered like brushed silver. I sat on the dock, the same one we built, and dangled my feet just above the surface. There was no place card with my name today. There never really had been. But names can be rewritten, and I was done letting silence write mine. My name is Nora Callahan, or at least that's the name they used when it was convenient. The sky over Karen Lake was pale and warm that May afternoon. The church bell rang across the hillside, echoing into trees that had stood for generations. I stood across the street from St. Jude's Cathedral, my hands tucked into the pockets of a navy coat I hadn't worn since college. I watched as the guests arrived for Michael Callahan's wedding, my younger brother, the golden boy, the only real child, as my mother used to say when she thought I wasn't listening. I wasn't officially invited. Technically, I got the information through a forwarded email from a cousin, no name in the greeting, no sentiment, just a PDF with dress code and time. There was no RSVP option. I suppose I was meant to take the hint, but I came anyway. The cathedral looked just as I remembered it. Tall, stained glass windows like frozen fire, carved wooden doors older than any memory I owned. Inside, I slipped into the last pew. I wore a simple gray dress and the coat, hair pulled back, face bare. I looked like a quiet guest, someone who had wandered in. The ceremony began with chimes and soft violin. My mother, Margaret Callahan, entered with polished grace, taking her place in the front row. Her hat was ivory and wide-brimmed, her lipstick flawless. Beside her sat Thomas, my father, stoic and unreadable as always. His hand rested proudly on Michael's shoulder as he walked past to meet his bride. When I turned 15, they forgot my birthday. I baked my own cupcake. It crumbled in my hand. Michael found me and offered a stale granola bar. Sorry, they're just busy. At 17, I was offered a scholarship to a summer writing program. Margaret said, "That's not practical. You'll stay home and help with the fundraiser." I learned to fold towels perfectly, to pour tea without noise, to disappear. When people visited, Margaret introduced me as our ward or a dear family friend. I was never her daughter. At college, I found a kind of silence that belonged to me. I worked in the library, stayed up reading, took long walks by the lake. But every holiday break, I returned, out of duty. Out of hope. Maybe they'd notice me again. Maybe I'd earned it by now. But every time I stepped into that house, I became invisible again. After Michael's wedding, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by unopened mail and half-done crossword puzzles. I turned on the radio. A host said, "Sometimes the hardest stories to tell are the ones we weren't invited to be part of." And I thought, that's my story. But I'm not done yet, because the girl they didn't name is about to speak. Before I knew I was excluded, I had already learned to feel small. Growing up in the Callahan house meant learning how to exist quietly. The creaky floorboards in the hallway were memorized by heart. I tiptoed between them to avoid drawing attention. Every room had a hierarchy, and I knew instinctively where I belonged, never at the head of the table. At 6, I arrived with nothing but a small bag and a pink plastic bunny I named Willow. Margaret said, "No need for clutter." Willow disappeared within a week. No one admitted throwing it away. My room was tidy, with beige wallpaper and a twin bed. It used to be a guest room. The first night, Thomas said, "Don't unpack too much. We'll see how things go." I kept my socks in the suitcase for a year. Michael, 2 years younger, had a room painted blue with a mural of a treehouse. He had a nameplate on his door. I had a sticky note that read, "Nora," which peeled off after a few months. No one replaced it. At school, I earned gold stars and teacher praise. At home, Margaret replied, "Don't get cocky." When I scored top in my grade for reading, she said, "It's only elementary school." Michael, meanwhile, drew a crayon dinosaur that vaguely resembled a turtle. It was framed in the hallway. I didn't resent him. He was kind to me in a distracted way. We played with Legos, built pillow forts, watched cartoons. He once gave me his extra gummy bear pack at lunch. He once defended me when a kid mocked my worn sneakers. But kindness isn't protection, and Michael didn't see the way the air stiffened when I entered a room, or if he did, he didn't name it. Holidays were the worst. Each Christmas, I'd wrap a handmade gift, knitted bookmarks, origami cards. Margaret would open it with a tight smile and say, "How thoughtful." Then, she'd unwrap Michael's plastic snow globe from the dollar store and cry with joy. Sometimes, truth doesn't shout. It waits, quietly, in drawers we forgot to open. A week after Michael's wedding, I returned to the Callahan house. Not for them, for me. Margaret had left a voicemail. Just one line. "There are boxes here. You might want to collect them." No greeting, no warmth. But it was the first contact in over a year. I arrived on a rainy Tuesday. The house looked exactly as I remembered. White clapboard, navy shutters, the porch swing that only Michael ever used. The wind had knocked over a pot of petunias. No one picked it up. Margaret wasn't home. Or maybe she was hiding. Either way, the front door was unlocked. Inside, the silence was thick. I walked past the dining room where we used to have roast beef on Sundays. Michael always got the biggest slice. Past the hallway lined with his sports trophies, into the study. The boxes sat in the corner, 3 of them, unlabeled. I knelt and opened the first one, school reports, my elementary drawings, a broken hair clip, a journal I'd kept at age 10, full of dreams about being a teacher or an astronaut. It was all there, hidden but saved. The second box held old receipts, cards from distant relatives, a dried corsage. At the bottom was a small red envelope addressed to Thomas. It was from my biological mother. I hadn't seen her handwriting in decades. I paused. My breath caught. I didn't open it. The third box was heavier, legal folders. I found an envelope marked Property Transfer, Karen Lake. I didn't remember signing anything. Then I saw it. My name, typed on the line beneath previous co-owner. Below it, a signature. My signature. But it wasn't mine. I blinked. My real signature loops left. This one dipped right, hesitant, stiff. It looked forged. I grabbed a photo from the side table, an old one of Thomas and Margaret on the Karen Lake dock, smiling. Behind them was a blurred shadow, a child's arm, cut off. I was that arm. Suddenly, everything felt engineered. The silence, the absence, the fact that my name was nowhere but just visible enough to deny I was forgotten. It wasn't neglect, it was erasure. I packed the documents, the journal, the envelope. I walked out with my arms full, heart pounding. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky still hung heavy. I didn't cry. Not yet. I wasn't ready to give them that much. Back in my apartment, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Hello? Hi, is this Janine from St. Vincent's Foster Services? She paused. Yes? Who's this? Nora Callahan. I think I need to ask you about a transfer that was never supposed to happen. The next morning, Janine called me back. Her voice was careful, lined with the weight of things she'd seen. Nora, I went through the archive. You were never meant to be transferred. The paperwork from 2003, someone added a second guardian signature months after the original. It was flagged, but overridden. Unusual, but it happens. Happens. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the papers I'd collected, snapshots of a life built on quiet betrayal. Later that afternoon, I called Margaret. She picked up on the second ring. Yes, no greeting, as if I were a telemarketer. I found the forged documents, I said. Silence. And the letter from my birth mother. A pause. Then, I thought you might. No shock, no denial. I never mattered to you. Did I? Her voice stayed composed. That's not true. You were difficult. You asked too many questions. You didn't blend. I wasn't supposed to blend. I was supposed to belong. She let out a soft breath. You always wanted things we couldn't give. I pressed my fingers against my temple. You mean love? Recognition? My own name on a door? Margaret sighed. You think you've suffered, but Michael... He needed the stability. He was fragile. We did what was best for the family. There it was, that word again. Family. As if it never included me. I stood in my kitchen, trembling not with fear but clarity. You forged my name, I said, voice flat. You stripped me of any legal connection. You hid my mother's letter. You erased me. That's a strong word, she whispered. Then let me say it stronger. You never intended to love me. You just needed a placeholder. The line went quiet. Then she said, You don't understand what we sacrificed. I do. You sacrificed the truth, and now it's your turn to listen. For the first time in decades, I told her everything, every invisible hurt, every vanished birthday, every time I sat in silence while she toasted someone else's milestones. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just spoke, and the voice that once hid in corners didn't tremble. When I hung up, my heart raced, but I wasn't scared. I felt present, solid, named. Later that week, I sent copies of the forged documents to a lawyer friend, not for revenge, for restoration, and maybe for justice. I didn't want anything from them now, only the truth, and I was ready to speak it, in court, in writing, in my own voice. Because when silence breaks, the echo is powerful, and mine had just begun. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No marble pillars, no echoing ceilings, just worn carpet, pew-like benches, and the smell of old paper. I sat beside my lawyer, Rachel, an old friend from college who once edited my poetry submissions. She believed in words the way I did. She believed names mattered. Across from us sat Margaret and Thomas. They looked older than I remembered, or maybe I was just seeing them clearly for the first time. Margaret's mouth was a straight line. Thomas stared at his folded hands. Michael wasn't there. This wasn't a criminal trial. It was probate, a petition to dispute forged property transfers and reclaim legal recognition as a former co-owner of the Karen Lake home. But for me, it was more. This was the room where my name would be spoken, in full, in public, and without shame. Rachel stood and laid out the evidence. The signatures that didn't match, the timeline inconsistencies, Janine's testimony from Foster Services. Then she introduced my journal, my letters, and the envelope from my birth mother, still unopened. The judge, a gray-haired woman named Keller, read each page with quiet precision. When my turn came, I stood. "My name is Nora Callahan," I said, and for much of my life, that name was used when it suited others and erased when it didn't. I told them what it meant to grow up as a ghost in someone else's house, what it cost to be needed but not wanted, helpful but never held. I spoke about the erasure, not just of property but of personhood, how the silence around my name made me question my own worth. Judge Keller nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Callahan." Margaret didn't speak. Thomas offered a quiet apology, 2 words, barely audible. "I'm sorry." But they didn't ring with regret, only closure. A week later, the ruling came in the mail. I was reinstated as a co-heir to the estate. The forged documents were invalidated. But more than the outcome, what struck me was the letter attached. In reviewing this case, the court acknowledges that formal systems often fail to reflect emotional truth. While we cannot legislate love, we can affirm standing. You have been heard. I folded the letter slowly. The paper crackled. My hands didn't shake. That night, I opened the red envelope from my birth mother. Inside was a card. No return address, just handwriting that said, "I hope you were loved. I hope they saw your light." I placed it on my desk, and for the first time, I felt like someone had. Next to it, I wrote a new card. "To the girl who had no place card. You do now. You always did." The house I moved into wasn't grand, just a 2-bedroom cottage on the far side of Karen Lake, nestled between the edge of the woods and a gravel path where deer sometimes wandered. It had creaky floors and chipped paint. The porch light flickered when the wind changed. But it was mine. I painted the front door soft yellow, bought secondhand curtains that danced when the window was open, and I planted hydrangeas, blue ones, like the ones in my journal from 3rd grade, the one Margaret said were too messy. Each morning, I lit a candle in the kitchen, just one, for memory, for presence, for possibility. I taught writing workshops at the library, helped teenagers find their voice on the page. They called me Ms. Nora and asked how to describe heartbreak without sounding bitter. "Describe the silence," I said, "and then fill it with what you wish you'd heard." Sometimes I still passed Callahan Estate on walks. It was quiet now, empty, for sale. I didn't stop. One evening, a girl from my writing class, Leah, 15, foster care, lingered after everyone left. She held her poem like it might dissolve. "I wrote about not knowing where I belong," she whispered. I looked at her, at the way she kept her shoulders small, her bag close, her voice tucked beneath apology. I placed a hand gently on the desk. "You belong here," I said. "You belong in the telling." She smiled, not fully, but enough. That night I reread the letter from my birth mother. I didn't cry, I didn't ache. I just let the words live, and I wrote her back. I didn't have an address, but I wrote anyway. "You hoped they saw my light. They didn't, but I found it again, and now I'm shining it for others." I placed the letter on my windowsill, let the wind carry it if it wished. Outside, the moon hung full, the lake shimmered, and the house, though quiet, felt full of names, spoken gently and light that didn't need permission to glow. Names carry weight. Some are given with love, others with expectation. Some are whispered, others are shouted. But the name that matters most is the one we choose for ourselves. On my 35th birthday, I filed the paperwork. Nora Elise Hart. Hart was my birth mother's maiden name. Elise, the middle name she gave me in the original adoption form that Margaret had hidden away. The judge asked if I wanted to make a statement. "Yes," I said. "This name is not a rejection, it's a reclamation." The gavel came down like a benediction. Afterward, I celebrated not with a party, but with a long walk through Karen Lake. The leaves had begun to turn, golden, rust, amber, my favorite time of year. When things don't die, they simply prepare to begin again. I passed the dock where Michael and I once built forts from driftwood. I stopped, touched the old railing. I didn't feel resentment, I felt peace. A week later, I launched a podcast called Quiet Names. Each episode featured someone who had once felt invisible. Foster kids, adult adoptees, immigrants, survivors of silence. People who found strength not in being loud, but in being true. Leah recorded the first episode with me. Her voice shook, then it didn't. I spoke last. You are not forgotten. You are not a footnote. You are the story. The show gained listeners, slowly, then steadily. Messages poured in, people who said, "That was me," or "I finally said it out loud." And every time someone said my name on the show, I smiled. Nora Hart. I was no longer a placeholder, no longer the girl in the last pew. I was the voice that spoke last, and I had written the room with no name into a home full of them. In the silence they gave her, Nora found her voice, and in a world that forgot her name, she claimed it, boldly, gently, and fully. From invisible child to guiding light, Nora's story reminds us that healing begins when we speak, and home begins when we are seen. If you've ever felt like a footnote in your own life, remember, your story matters, and your name is yours to write. Thank you for being here. Until next time, stay brave and stay kind.